everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my August wrap-up. And in August I finished 5 books, which is kind of on the low end for me in terms of how many books I read each month. I also had kind of a meh month in terms of like ratings. I didn't read anything that I like really hated, but I also didn't really love a lot of the stuff that I was reading. So it's gonna be a lot of just real in the middle kind of reviews this month. The first book that I finished in August was Only When It's Us by Chloe Leese, which is the first book in the Bergman Brothers series. I'm not sure how many are going to be in this series, but it is a contemporary romance series. This first one is kind of like a sports college romance. We have 2 main characters, Willa and Ryder, and let me make sure his name is actually Ryder because now I'm doubting myself. It was a while since I read this. Yes, it is. Okay, good for me. I remembered. And Willa is a college athlete. She plays soccer for the school, and she is also taking business classes. And in one of her business classes, Ryder is also in that class. And because she had missed a class or 2, she asks him for notes from some of the classes that she missed. He doesn't respond to her, and she just assumes that he ignored her and he's a jerk. Later on, she finds out that he actually is deaf and he hadn't heard her ask. But that still kind of set the tone for their relationship. So later, when they're paired together for a class project, they kind of work together grudgingly and eventually develop a friendship, but they are still kind of friends who like give each other a hard time and like tease and prank each other. Although eventually their friendship, of course, becomes a romance. Overall, I had a really fun time with this one. I enjoyed both of the main characters. Willa sometimes could be like a little over the top with her like hot-headedness, and she's an extremely closed-off person, so some of the development of their relationship is her sort of learning to open up and let people in, especially because another part of her character's storyline is that her mother has cancer and is in the hospital, and Willa hasn't told anybody else in her life about this. And so she kind of has these 2 parts of her lives that don't intersect between taking care of her mom and then being in school. And so there's a lot about her growing and like learning to open up and also not just assume the worst of people, and to kind of temper her hot-headedness so that she can let people be close to her and so she can communicate better with people. And Ryder is very much like, he's a very like steadying presence in their relationship. And overall I enjoyed the 2 of them and the way that they kind of would like tease each other and things along the way. Sometimes there were things about the writing that didn't quite work for me. So there were a lot of like euphemisms for things, like Willa referring to her tulip, or her like, I think she used the word like chucha or something like that, and talking about sexy times. And I'm just like, I'm not a fan of euphemisms like that in romance books. Like, I just feel like they are adults. They should use adult words. We don't need euphemisms. It just makes it like kind of weird and awkward. I'm not a fan of that. However, it was not so egregious that it like really hindered my enjoyment of the book. There were times in the story where there was some like miscommunication or misunderstanding, which I don't usually like that much. However, like, it could get frustrating in this, but it wasn't the worst because it made sense for the character. It wasn't completely for no reason. It was related to the fact that Willa really has her walls up and doesn't let people in. She doesn't let people help her, and she really like compartmentalizes parts of her life. And so like, it made sense for the character, so it didn't bother me as much as some other times in which there's like miscommunication for absolutely no reason. But as I said, I really enjoyed these characters overall. And I probably will be continuing on in the series because it is going to be following a different brother in Ryder's family for each book. And we got little glimpses of his family, and I really enjoyed his family, and I'm very curious to like learn more about them. So I think I am going to be continuing on with the series, and I gave this first book I think 4 stars. The next book that I finished in August was Path of Fate by Diana Farrow Francis, which is the first book in the Path trilogy, I think it's called, which is a fantasy series where in this one we are following Riesel, who has grown up in this town but has always kind of been an outcast. She doesn't know who her parents are, and she's kind of been raised like collectively by the town, but then she really feels like she has found her place in this community by being a Tark, which is essentially a healer for the community. So she lives outside of like the main town or the main city, but feels like she's kind of found her place through this calling. At the beginning of the book, there is a war that has been going on between her country and another one that they're hoping to kind of bring to an end. There are some peace talks that are happening at the, I was not clear as to whether this was like a town or a city. So I don't know, I'm gonna go with city at the moment because it seemed maybe important, but there's some peace talks happening in this city that she lives right outside of. And during this time when they're like just about to sign a treaty, the daughter of one of the visiting like kings or nobles is kidnapped, and that just throws everything off when everyone suddenly becomes, you know, focused on the fact that this girl was kidnapped, and they don't really know who did it, and was it a political plot, and they don't know exactly which side would have kidnapped this person. And Riesel gets involved because she also has recently just found out that she has been chosen by the goddess to be a Ahadlat Kazlain, which is always confusing to try and pronounce, which is this special group of people who are chosen by their goddess who are able to bond with an animal and like mind communicate with this animal, and they have special powers and kind of a special status within this world in which they are not really, they're kind of like not beholden to anybody else. They really only are ruled by the goddess. But Riesel does not want to be a Ahadlad Kazlain. There are a lot of things about the lifestyle that she really does not want, and she's been very happy with her life as a Tark, as a healer, and she wants to just like live her little life in the cottage that she has and take care of this community that she's grown up in. So at first she resists this calling, but eventually when this girl is kidnapped, Riesel realizes that she can help, and that if she accepts this calling and these powers that come with it, she can actually make a difference. And so that spurs her onto like taking up this new calling and tracking down what happened to this girl. And so that is the main plot of this, is Riesel and a group of other people tracking down what happened to the kidnapped girl, and also trying to figure out along the way like who kidnapped her, and is it like a conspiracy, and who's involved. And you know, she kind of suspects people within her own group that she's traveling with, while she is also learning to use her new powers and trying to bond with her animal companion, which is a Goshawk. Goshawk? Is that how you pronounce that? And this book, I enjoyed this. There are some, like, it has a lot of elements that I like. It has an animal companion, it has a healer, it has a goddess that's like actually exists and is like involved in the story to some extent. These are all things that I enjoy. It also has kind of a 2000s fantasy feel. When was this published? Yeah, 2003. There's like this feeling that fantasy published in like the early 2000s has, which I really like, and so it feels very like familiar and a little bit like comforting or cozy to it. There wasn't anything about this that like really stood out to me or made me really particularly love it, but I did enjoy it, and it just had elements that I like, and it had this very like familiar feel to it, so I did enjoy this. There were some things about like, I think that I wanted more from like I wanted more build up to things. There were some things that happened, especially in like relationship development, that just felt like they just kind of happened. Like, not that they came out of nowhere, but they just like, I don't know how to describe it. It just didn't feel like it was fully integrated in a way that like, I don't know how to explain my thoughts on this. It just felt like it just happened, and that's the best description I can have. So I guess I kind of wanted more build up or context to some of these things. There also is a bit of a romance that happens that I felt like that came out of nowhere, kind of, because there are these two characters who become friends over the course of the book, but I never got a romance vibe from them. And then at the end, they're kind of like, oh my gosh, I've been in love with you this whole time. And I'm like, when did this happen? Like, you've been friends this whole time and I liked your friends, but like never got a romance vibe until right at the end when you were like, oh my God, I'm in love. So I didn't love that about it. But yeah, overall, I had fun with this. I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho, which is a little novella. And in this, we're following, there's this like band of bandits who, I don't know, are like stealing things from temples and then reselling them to nobility. And then there is this like monk who joins their band. There's this woman who's a monk who has recently like left the temple that she was a part of, and for some reason joins these bandits. I have a really hard time explaining like what is this book actually about, because I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but looking back, I'm not sure what like the central plot was, and like it's a little novella, so maybe that contributes to the fact that like it just seemed like we were kind of following these characters around, but I wasn't sure that there was like a central plot to it. But I enjoyed the characters. You know, the like leader of the bandits is this kind of like cheeky outlaw, and he has his like, you know, merry men that are with him. I really liked the woman who's the monk, that she's very like feisty and opinionated, and I just enjoyed all of them. I would have liked to know more about this world, because there's like a war going on that we really don't find out that much about, but it has influenced why some of these temples are being destroyed, and then the bandits are like stealing objects from them, but then they're like reselling them for like reasons. I don't know. I don't want to get into too much detail because it's like a very short book, but like overall I had fun with it, but I have a really hard time explaining like what was it actually about. But I did enjoy the characters, so I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I read Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo, which is the most recent book in the Grishaverse. It's the second book in the King of Scars duology. And in this series, we are primarily following Nikolai, Zoya, and Nina, although there are some other character perspectives like peppered in along the way. And yeah, since this is like so far into this world, I can't really talk that much about like what actually happens in it. But this was not my favorite book in the Grishaverse. I don't know. Like, I always find Leigh Bardugo's writing very like easy to read. I do think her characters are engaging. But I just like I just haven't been as like invested in this duology, which I think a lot of other people have also been feeling. I've heard some very like mixed reviews of the series from a lot of people. So I think I'm not alone in this. I definitely feel like the second half was better than the first half. The first half was a little bit like nothing was really happening, or just like wasn't that interesting. And then the second half, like I felt like the plot really started moving, some interesting things were going on, the stakes got higher, and also we got to see more characters that had been in previous books. So there are some characters from other books who get to show up in the second half, which just made it so much more fun. Yeah, I also feel like there are certain things that happen in this book that don't totally like make sense. So there are a lot of elements or like things that happen, especially towards the end, whereas like I love it that this is what happened and that like this is how it turned out, but it also makes no sense. The way this ended, okay, also have mixed feelings about, because I do not really like, it's clearly setting up the next book, which I don't really like what it is setting up the plot of the next book to be. However, I am excited that it seems like it is setting up maybe the third Six of Crows book. I don't know for sure, but that's what it seems like. That's the direction it seems like it's going, or at least that the crows will be heavily involved in the next book, which I love them. They are my favorite characters from the Grishaverse. And so if that is the case, I'm excited about that. Not super excited about what the plot will be, but very excited to see those characters again. Yeah, I don't know. This whole book was just like very mixed feelings. I gave it 3.5 stars. And then the final book that I read in August, yes, was A Bad Deal for the Whole Galaxy by Alex White, which is the second book in the Salvagers trilogy, which is a kind of sci fantasy series, because it does take place like in space and there's all this advanced technology and they're going between planets and all of this stuff, but there's also magic, and so there's this kind of combination of magic and technology, and there are people who have like magical powers, and one of the main characters in this is able to like telepathically connect with technology. So that's kind of like a fun sci-fi fantasy blend to it. Yeah, and this is following, so okay, I read the first book years ago, maybe like 3 years ago or something, and really I should have reread it before reading the second book, but I didn't want to. And I feel like I did enjoy this, but I may have enjoyed it more if I had actually like remembered what happened in the first book. But this takes place a few years after the first one. We're catching up with the characters, kind of see where they are after the events of the first book. Now there is this like cult that is kind of arising in the galaxy, and is becoming more and more dangerous. Our characters are kind of pulled back into saving the universe or the galaxy once again from this evil cult. And over the course of the story, there are quite a few different like tropes or plot tropes that happen. At one point they are like infiltrating a cult, there is like undercover work, there's a bit of a heist at one point. There's just like a lot of things that happen in this. But yeah, I think that I, as I said, would have enjoyed this more if I had reread the first book and actually remembered what happened. Even so, I did think it was very fun. I think these characters are fun. This does have a lot of action in it, which like overall I thought was pretty good. Sometimes I would zone out a little bit during the action just because I'm not a super action person, but overall I thought the action was pretty good. And yeah, it was just really fun. And I think I gave this one 3.5 stars also. So those are all of the books that I read in August. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.